two friends taking pictures of the rising full moon on a summer night.
Two teenage kids doing what teenage kids do.
When a stranger with a gun and a death wish changed everything.
It was violent, it was senseless, and I will never understand it, I will never accept it.
I'm Amy Donaldson, and unfortunately, we're all too familiar with stories about how violence shatters lives. But what we rarely see is how they are rebuilt. In a new podcast, The Letter, we relive tragedy, but only so we can hear the rest of the story. The struggle to reclaim lives, the realities of grief, and the possibilities of forgiveness.
I believe in miracles. Sometimes I thought, there are no miracles. Yeah, there are, and this is a big one.
Follow The Letter at theletterpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
So you're living in Seattle.
Living in Seattle.
She's in the psychiatric ward for
Yep.
2 weeks detoxing.
Yeah.
Did you guys think at that point maybe Mom found a rock bottom?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right? After being homeless, she attempts suicide. Yes. Yes.
But there's got to be a bunch of them throughout this whole ordeal of, that's got to be a rock bottom.
Yeah.
That's got to be a rock bottom. Hey, Mom, is this your rock bottom?
Yeah. And every time you would think you would learn, but you just get your hopes up, right? Because I believe in hope. I'm still hopeful despite everything that's happened. Yeah.
Hope is so powerful.
So she gets out of detox at 2 weeks and no one will take her. The relationship's totally on the rocks with my stepdad. They want to get divorced, but he was compassionate. He doesn't divorce her so she could still have insurance. He's a good guy. So, but she can't go back in with my grandma either. My grandmother's getting old. Her health is failing. So Mom comes up to me.
Seattle.
Yeah. My brother puts her on a plane. She flies up to Seattle, and she gets out of detox on so many medications, I couldn't even keep track of everything, from Klonopin to gabapentin to just this myriad of this cocktail of medications that she keeps insisting are going to be okay and are going to make her better. Meanwhile, my husband and I are watching her even abuse these medications. It became like this obsessive compulsive thing for her. If she needed ibuprofen, she'd take 15. It was anything she could get her hands on. She would take. In fact, I remember I was getting my wedding pictures taken. So this is years before. My friend's parents took the photos. And it wasn't until years later that my friend came to me and said, when you were here getting your photos here, your mom stole my parents' antidepressants out of our cupboard. But we were too scared to say anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's so much shame and it's just uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable being open and talking about it. But again, I think I'm seeing change happening. I'm seeing the climate get different. I'm seeing people be more willing to be vulnerable. And I feel confident in this day and age that she would have said something,
Hey.
I think the conversation's out there now, and it wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
Then.
It wasn't then, and I'm so grateful for that. So Mom comes up to us. She's totally abusing even all of these medications that she's taking. We take her to get a prescription of gabapentin filled. It's 90 pills in the bottle. Within 2 days, she's taken them all.
Wow.
She's lethargic. I have a good friend who's a medical doctor. I have him come over, check her out.
Yeah.
It was just that intense. This tolerance that she had built up and the need that she needed to feed was just out of control. So my husband and I think, again, our lack of education. Okay, we have her here. She has none of her drug contacts anymore. She has no phone. She has no car. She knows nobody in our area. We are going to be her rehabilitation center. So we take everything from her. I even take her cigarettes at that point, and I put a nicotine patch on her, and I decide, tough love. Good luck.
Doing the best you can with what you know.
Oh, my gosh. Yes, that's exactly what we did. I did the best that I could, and we get her sober. And
that's a miracle in itself.
It's the first time that she had ever been sober around my kids. First time they got to see Grandma, It had been so many years since I had seen her that way, and she was almost back to herself, but not quite there. I don't know. I'd say maybe she was 80% of the 100% Debbie. So I just latched onto that, and she stayed with us for a few months, to the point where my husband and I said, why don't you move in with us? How about we make this long term? Let's maybe try to do this for a year or two. Let's get you a job in the area. You need more time. This is not enough time. We had tried to take her to addiction recovery meetings. She went to one and said, no, I'm good. I don't need this. I'm okay. I'm sober. I'm good. I don't need this. Mom just, anytime she would get clean, she just would tell all of us, I'm okay. I don't need these meetings and these support groups and all of this. And so we're 3 months into it, and we offer for her to move in with us.
Which is a huge step.
Yeah.
I mean, think of the 10-year track record.
Yeah. I know. And she says no. And I just remember being crushed at this moment, because I knew from being around her and watching her that we only had 80% Debbie. We didn't have 100% Debbie yet. And I knew that if she left, she'd go back to it.
Why did she say no?
She said no because remember, I had this sister who is 15 years younger than me. So she was born after that surgery when my mom got addicted. And I don't know, again, what all of that looks like in terms of when she was using and whatnot. But she said, I got to get back to your sister. I need to be there for her. She's still in, I think she's in junior high at this point. I've got to get back to your sister, she says. And my husband and I say, well, yeah, absolutely. But you've got to be 100% before you can be the mom that she needs you to be. And my poor younger sister, I feel like she's the tragedy in all of this, right? Because her whole life, she just knew mom as an addict.
Yeah, but to be fair, it's all a tragedy. I mean, you and your kids. I mean, the one thing that was really poignant for me is when you said this is the first time your kids had ever seen her sober, which is a great moment, but also on the flip side of that coin, it's very sad, because your kids are how old at this age?
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. I think I had 4 of my 5 at this time. So my oldest is 14 now, and my youngest is 5. So I want to say maybe my oldest at the time was 10. I think maybe 10. Yeah.
Had you ever tried to talk to the kids about what grandma was going through, or
no?
No.
Because we lived in a different state, I kind of just concealed it from them.
Yeah.
They talked on the phone. And sometimes my oldest would get off the phone and say, "Grandma sounds really weird this time."
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe she's having a bad day. I don't know.
Making up excuses.
I didn't know. Oh, yeah, I totally did. I made up excuses. I would make up excuses for my mom to my siblings, too. I was always trying to be her defender.
Why do you think that was important for you to do?
I think I just always saw my mom for who she really was, and not for the addict that she was. I'm not the kind of person to hold a grudge. But it really would bother me when everybody else would see her as the addict. But I'm sure that was me being in denial.
Yeah,
so.
That's mom. Come on.
Yeah.
That's mom, guys.
Yeah.
We don't
Cut
talk
her
about our
some
mom
slack.
this way.
Let's, And we would. My siblings and I would talk about it for sure. But we didn't know what to do. We just didn't know what to do. So my mom says, I got to go back and I got to do this. And no matter what my husband and I do, we can't convince her. And I took her to the airport and I put her on the plane. And I remember as I was walking her up to the security checkpoint, and I got this really clear impression that just said, this is the last time. This is the last time you're going to be with your mom sober. And so I remember looking at her, and I remember putting her face between my hands. And I remember just saying, Mom, I love you. And you've always been enough for me. And I gave her a big hug. And I let her go. Excuse me. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
And within 2 weeks of being home, she was using again. And this was the moment where I finally realized, Andrea, you can't save her. I remember talking to her and saying, Mom, like, why can't you just quit for me? I didn't understand then the way addiction worked and how it alters your brain and it hijacks your brain. I didn't get it. I thought she could still choose us. But the reality was she was a slave to that substance. And it's this difficult... It's difficult. Addiction is so complicated, right? Because there is that mix of they are a slave to that substance, but then there's the behaviors as well. And
it is very complicated.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's so hurtful to so many friends and family because we assume, like you said, your personality, you set your mind to something, you can do it. Those of us who have never been addicted to a substance, we don't understand that there's something that can override that power. So a person who's capable of doing many great things, once they become addicted, there's the neurobiology aspect of it where your brain literally does change and it functions only to get that substance. And that affects your way of thinking, that affects your behavior. Part of the recovery process is learning to get back control of your thought process and your behaviors. So those are vital and important. But the neurobiology of it is really something that we're still just understanding, every month new articles and research comes out that helps us understand that, yes, being a slave to it is a good way to put that. It changes how you function. And so when we personalize it as friends and family of an addict, it's so hurtful because we feel like they're choosing the substance over us when in fact it's much more complicated than just making a choice.
You're listening to Project Recovery. More with Andrea in just a second.
Two friends taking pictures of the rising full moon on a summer night.
Two teenage kids doing what teenage kids do.
When a stranger with a gun and a death wish changed everything.
It was violent, it was senseless, and I will never understand it. I will never accept it.
I'm Amy Donaldson, and unfortunately, we're all too familiar with stories about how violence shatters lives. But what we rarely see is how they are rebuilt. In a new podcast, The Letter, we relive tragedy, but only so we can hear the rest of the story. The struggle to reclaim lives, the realities of grief, and the possibilities of forgiveness.
I believe in miracles. Sometimes I thought, there are no miracles. Yeah, there are, and this is a big one.
Follow The Letter at theletterpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
I kind of see where Andrea's going with this because, you know, there's a meme or there's a saying in recovery, and it's probably both. It says, love the addict, hate the disease. But sometimes it's so hard to do that because I understand what you're saying is that, you know, your mom was an addict and she was a slave to this substance. But it changed her personality. It changed the mom that you know. And it was hard to differentiate going, that's not my mom right there. That's not her doing that. But it's her. I mean, so what do you do?
You feel paralyzed at times. You feel hopeless. But at some point you just have to say, okay, and it was after she walked off that plane, after I got that impression, like, this is the last time. go-getter Andrea was like, okay, I gotta be all in with my family now. I need to be 100% for my husband. I need to be 100% for my kids. And from here on out, I've got to learn how to set boundaries. Mom, I can't talk to you 10 times a day anymore. I can talk to you maybe every few days. I'm not going to pick up the phone anymore when you call unless it's the right time for me. I had to learn to set boundaries, and I had to learn to be okay with setting those boundaries. There was so much guilt that I felt because I felt like for so many years I was under the misconception that if I set these boundaries and I take care of Andrea, that I'm somehow neglecting my mom. But it was really hard to come to terms with that reality, and it took time from that point on. I want to say it was probably a good 4 years or so before I really felt like I was in a healthy place where I could deal with Mom's addiction, but still be really happy and still be okay. But gosh, it took a long time to learn to set those boundaries.
So your mom lived with you for a couple months up in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
She flew back to Utah.
Mm-hmm.
Within 2 weeks started using.
Mm-hmm.
And then how long did she continue using for?
Let's see. Mom, how many years was that? I'm trying to think of the timeline here.
No, you're all right.
It was probably another 5 years.
So it sounds like
I could be wrong on this, but
her addiction spanned 15 years?
Oh, the addiction was 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So I guess, let's see, if my daughter was 9 or 10 when Mom was with us, my daughter's 14 now. So what that looks like is I finally learned to set boundaries. I talked to my mom. We're still close because I just can't let her go. So, and that's what worked for me. And I had to learn to be okay with how my siblings dealt with things too, because I had some siblings that just didn't have a relationship with her anymore. And that's okay for them because that's what they needed. And that's totally justified. But for me, I just wasn't okay with that for myself. And so our relationship looked like a phone call every couple of days, which she was so far gone that most of the time she'd say the exact same thing over and over again. She'd repeat herself 10 or 15 times in a conversation. And it just looked like me at the end of every conversation just saying, well, Mom, we're thinking about you. We love you so much. And if things are hard still, and you're still using, and you decide that you want help, I'll be right there. Let me know. I love you.
It was probably good to hear her voice just to know she was doing all right.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I set boundaries. Yes, I learned how to be happy. But every day I had that thought in the back of my head. There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't think, is this going to be the day that I get the call? Until that day came.
You got the call.
Yeah. Yeah. So, about 1.5 years ago, my husband and I moved back to Utah. It's the first time we had been back for most of our marriage. We just have this strong feeling that we need to come back to Utah. And we had a long talk, like, what kind of boundaries are we going to have with your mom? Because now we're going to be in the same state, and what's that going to look like? And we just had to keep our distance. Having her in the same room with us was too painful for me to deal with because she was drunk all the time. So Mom couldn't get her hands on opioids as much anymore towards the end. There were no resources. She had moved in with a random person who lived around the corner from my stepfather, even though she was still married to him, and he kind of became her enabler. She turned to vodka. She drank. She was She was the first person at the liquor store waiting for them to open the doors every day. In fact, her mind was so far gone after she passed, and we went into her home to clean out her things. I remember finding random little notes on pieces of paper strewn throughout the house in the back of mailing envelopes or whatever that would say, I have 84 cents, need another $3 for a pint of vodka. Like, she'd write these notes down. I mean, she was just gone. Last time I saw her, so we had moved back to Utah. We'd been here for about 2 months, and I thought, okay, I didn't even tell her we were moving back because I just needed time to do this. And so I thought, you know what, I'm gonna go see her on her birthday. Like, I need to at least see her, even though it's gonna be painful for me. So I go and I pick her up, and I took her to our favorite restaurant growing up, and I was embarrassed. I was so embarrassed to be with her, and I was trying to be okay with it, but she got up from the table at one point, and I saw the pint of vodka sticking out the back of her shirt. She kept getting up to go to the bathroom to drink and then come back to sit down and eat with us, and it was intense. And that was on her birthday, February of 2018. So I get home after that, and I think I can't be in the same room with her anymore. I love her, but until she decides to get clean, I just can't do this. It's too painful for me to see her so altered. And so June 25th in the morning, about 4 o'clock in the morning, I get a call from my younger sister. And she says, Mom's been found dead.
Oh. The call you've been dreading.
Yeah, for so many years, right? I mean, the first, 4 or 5 years of her addiction were secret, and the last 15 were out in the open. I mean, this was 20 years of this horrible feeling and the worst fear coming to fruition. So I get the call that she's passed, and I am distraught, because during those last few years where I finally set those boundaries, and I felt like I did a lot of addiction research, and I got myself educated the best that I could so that I could emotionally handle everything, and I really was in a good place. But during that whole time, I still held out hope. You know, I just listened to the podcast that you did with Destiny Garcia, and oh, what an inspiring woman. What an inspiring woman. Yeah, that's what I thought was going to happen for my mom. That was the picture that I painted in my mind, that eventually
she was going to get sober and turn
that
it
eventually
around.
Mom was going to choose, and she would choose, and then she'd finally be free. But her getting free meant losing her life. Which was hard for me to come to terms with. So I'm in denial when I get that phone call. I'm angry. I'm upset. I remember my husband holding me, and I remember just pounding him in the back. Like, I just was releasing all these years of this emotion.
Years.
Yes, and thinking it can't be true. It's not true. It's not true. So I hopped in my car, and I drove from Layton to Kearns. And I show up, and there's police tape all over the house. She had died in her sleep, and so they had to check things out. So it was another 3 or 4 hours before we could go in and identify her body and confirm, because I didn't believe the detective. I just couldn't believe it until I saw her with my own eyes. And so then that was when a new journey to heal began for me. You know, learning to accept, okay, this isn't the ending. This is not the ending that I hoped for. And I remember being so angry with God too, and feeling like I did everything He asked me to do. This was an ending that I was looking for.
But since that time, it's been a year and a couple of months. I've had a lot of really amazing things happen in my life.
The blessings.
So many blessings and so much comfort. Gosh, the community is great. People are good. People show up for you. They were there, and I knew it was going to be okay, but I felt real hopeless in those first couple of months. It was just such this mix of emotions, right? One day I would feel okay, and then the next day I would... It's the grief. It's the grieving process, right? Those first couple of months are intense.
They're pretty a lot of ups and downs, for sure.
Yeah.
Emotional roller coaster. A lot of times within the hour you feel like that.
Yes.
Sometimes we talk about different personality traits, and most of our traits have, a good side and a not so good side. And I'm, going to go out on a limb here. I don't think it's a very far limb, and say you're a real optimist. That you're that type of a person. And for the listeners, an optimist is somebody who definitely, sees the glass half full. I can do it. They believe in themselves. They're very involved in change, and that's a wonderful quality. I think part of the difficulty in your grieving process was actually the downside of optimism. You had held on all those years to the mom that you knew from childhood.
Yes.
And you were so... It's not a bad thing, because you believed, just like our guest... she can turn it around. She'll come back somehow to the mom that I knew. And it wasn't until she passed that optimistic belief, finally, you had to deal with letting go of that. And that's really hard for an optimist. It feels, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth.
Yeah.
In some ways, it almost feels like a failure. Like, I can't believe I didn't win this. Like, this was going to happen.
That's exactly what it felt like. I felt defeated.
And that, whereas maybe some of your siblings had let go of that already by not having the same type of relationship, but you were her defender. You were believing in her, and it's so hard to make that shift. And it sounds like this year, and probably still today, you're still accepting the fact that things didn't turn out the way you knew they could, or that was a possibility, but it didn't happen.
But crazy enough, this isn't where your mom's story ends.
No, it's not. It's interesting. Really quick, there's a quote by author Jeanette Walls. I believe she wrote The Glass Castle, and she says, "One of the hardest things you will ever have to do, my dear, is to grieve the loss of a person who is still alive."
Yeah.
So that grief for me, that was 20 years long, right? So after she passes, it's intense. But I feel like, I've been grieving for 20 years, and now, like, I'm ready to that wave of grief, right? It used to be where it would roll in and it would settle. But now that wave rolls in, and I have a moment where I let myself feel all those feelings that are demanding to be felt. I let it all out, and then that wave rolls back out to sea.
You're staying present.
And I can be present, and I can be there for my kids and my family. And, it takes a deliberate, conscious effort to not feed those really desperate, sad thoughts when they come, right? Like, I'll acknowledge them. And then I move on.
That's a very mindful approach to dealing with that.
Yeah, I've been working on that a lot. Doing a lot of yoga, a lot of mindfulness, a lot of meditation.
I'm a firm believer in both of them.
Oh my goodness, seriously. I mean, when people ask how you got through the last year, I'm like, yoga, yoga and family support and meditation, right? Just that opportunity to process and give myself that time set aside to go through those feelings and then, move on. And like you said, Casey, be present. So no, mom's journey doesn't end there. So those first couple of months, the grief was really intense. But as time passed, I knew that there was going to be more to her story. And at first I was so angry with God, thinking, I can't believe that this is how mom's journey ended. And then one day I had this thought, that's not it. Andrea, this isn't the end. This isn't the end of your mom's journey. This is just the beginning. And since that time, I've followed through with that impression, and I've started to share this experience, and the healing that's come has been really amazing. I opened up like an Instagram account because I didn't know what that was going to look like. How do you share? Well, that's what you do in this day and age, right? So I open up an Instagram account and I kind of start posting about some of those thoughts. I'm just being vulnerable and expressing those feelings that I have, and messages start coming in. Like, I have a son who's addicted to opioids, or I'm an addict myself. Or so just the power in being vulnerable and getting it out there, the healing that I have been brought just from sharing my story, and feels good. It feels good to know, I
think that vulnerability allows connection to happen. And
yes.
I think that's what you're saying
is
that
that's where it's at.
When we're not willing to be open, when we're not willing to be vulnerable, we close ourselves off from the healing that happens through connection with other people. And it's that collective sharing that really brings people together. I mean, I saw it at Casey's house on Sunday,
sure.
with that family and friends together. And it sounds like, even though we sort of tongue-in-cheek laugh about, an Instagram account, but what a wonderful way to connect with people you would never otherwise ever meet. You would never meet all those people that we can connect with through something like a social media account.
Yeah, and it feels good to share that, because like I had mentioned earlier, when I think about when my mom got addicted all those years ago, and I think, my gosh, if the vulnerability would have been there, if the education would have been there, if the knowledge would have been there, I do believe things would have turned out a lot differently for Mom. And so I'm grateful to be a part of that movement today. I'm grateful to add my voice to help get rid of this opioid epidemic. I'm grateful for any addiction, Substance abuse has touched my family. It's been hard. It's been a long road.
Earlier in this podcast, I shared a letter that my daughter wrote to me.
Which was great.
You wrote a letter.
I did. Yeah. This year on our birthday, I wrote a letter to Mom. And I just poured my heart into it. And I feel like it really illustrates what I've learned from the addiction of a loved one and where I'm at now. So I'll go ahead and read that to you. I hope I can get through this. Dear Mom, on your birthday. Today I listened to Bon Jovi, Rush, Foreigner, Celine Dion, and Leanne Womack. I danced around my kitchen. I deep cleaned my bathroom. I ate potato chips with ketchup, and I dipped my French fries in my Frosty. I cranked up my radio. I drummed on the steering wheel with my hands. And I sang Heartbreaker by Pat Benatar in the car like the most bad girl rocker girl on the planet. I tried to work, eat, dance, and sing like you. I watched I Love Lucy. I visited my dad in the hospital and later laughed at lunch with friends. I said hello to my neighbors, and I hugged everyone in the room. I went to my daughter's class program, and I smiled up at her with pride, the way you used to look at me, like I was the greatest. I tried to laugh, serve, and love like you. I responded to messages from people who love someone struggling with opioid addiction. I researched more about helping the addict and tried to learn more about depression and anxiety and mental health. I tried to offer comfort and strength to those who think they have lost hope. I am doing this now for you. Mom, thank you for teaching me to enjoy life, to celebrate others, to love unconditionally, and to care so deeply that it hurts equally. Thank you for teaching me that the face of addiction can be found in all of us. I don't judge now because of you. In the end, I watched addiction enslave you, bind you in its deceitful chains, which you could not break, and in a final gesture, put its ugly hand over your mouth and stifle your vibrancy forever. But Mom, you taught me to be a fighter, and I will fight to educate and to serve in your honor. I will fight for you. Mom, it is compassion, forgiveness, and the faith to act that will carry me through today and tomorrow. It is the memory of your smile and the deep way that you loved me that will help me write a chapter of hope for myself, your children, my family, and anyone around me who will listen. I will teach that joy can be found even in grief. I will never stop for you. Happy birthday, Mommy.
Wow.
What, thank you, by the way, for sharing that.
Sure.
That's very personal and I think is going to benefit a lot of people who heard that. Writing, I often call those therapeutic letters. That's a letter that's really for you. What has that done for you, just writing that letter and being able to share it with people?
Yeah. Well, the response I got was awesome, just in that people finally felt connected. I mean, a big part of my goal in this journey is, how can I humanize the addict? How can I make it so that people don't just think that the addict is the homeless individual on the street, or, no, the face of addiction is in our homes today.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. It looks like you. It looks like me.
It was me.
Yeah.
And it affects, your grandchildren up in Seattle. It affects, it affects so many people, and it's so interesting to not only be able to talk with people who have been addicted and overcome their addiction, but family members.
Right.
That's been a wonderful thing about this show, I think, is being able to connect with folks who are, part of the waves of addiction, and how that is bringing people together and continuing this conversation in our culture, because without awareness and education, these sorts of things just continue on and on.
I think humanizing the addict is a very powerful lesson that I'm going to take away from today, because I think a lot of times it's just easier to not humanize them because emotionally for yourself.
Well, I hope that people will, as they're driving around today or out and about, they'll see a homeless person and realize that's somebody's mother, that's somebody's father, that's that there is a person there struggling. And there are various reasons why a person might be homeless, but addiction and untreated mental illness are the two largest causes of homelessness. And those people most likely at some point were a vibrant, functioning, happy person until their lives were taken over by addiction.
Andrea, I'm sure your mother's looking down from heaven and so proud of you, and you carrying on her torch and her fight. And I'm in awe that you'd come on our show and share such a personal story with us and a letter. If people wanted to follow your Instagram or follow more about your story and the wonderful things you're doing, where would they go?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Andrea Jean Sorensen, and it's Sorensen with an E-N at the end. So you can find me on Facebook too, and I have a website at that same address as well. So the goal in all of this is to make sure that people get that they are not alone. And I also want to make it very clear that even if you haven't been directly touched by addiction, maybe you've got a friend like me that has a family member that they've lost or that is struggling now. And we need to be educated. I feel like it's our civic duty. It's our responsibility to make sure that we're taking the time to learn this, because at some point or another, addiction's going to touch your life. And I want to do what I can to offer a place of education and connection, and just know that there is hope, and we can continue to have hope if we're willing to learn, we're willing to act, and we're willing to serve. So thank you for having me on here, because it means a lot to me. I am continuing my mother's journey. It didn't end.
No, it hasn't. The world needs more Andrea.
Absolutely.
Dr. Matt, anything?
I just, again, thank you so much for being vulnerable and modeling to everyone that being open and vulnerable is a healthy thing, that it connects people, and this story that you have to share is a way of honoring your mom and helping others perhaps have a different outcome in their lives.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Project Recovery. If you know somebody who needs some help, have them do what I did and give Pinnacle Recovery Center a call. Project Recovery is a KSL podcast.